So I guess I'll get things started. Today we're going to run a little networking workshop. My name is Ralph Hertz, uh, Joe, and we'd like to start off by jumping into some basic networking tips since a lot of you seem to be pretty new with this. And one thing to keep in mind when you're networking is that everyone is there for the same reason, right? Like you don't need to be shy about the fact that you're networking because everyone understands that. And another major thing to keep in mind is that it's as much about asking as it is about telling. So when you're talking with someone, they might ask you a question about yourself. It's good to answer the question, but always make sure you find opportunities to turn these around after you answer the question and ask them about them because number one, it's important to learn about them as a person, but also, people like to learn about themselves. And if you're just talking about yourself, you're never really going to develop any form of relationship. And one other thing is if you are new, it's okay to say so because this is not only a natural icebreaker, but it's also, it might open up a lot of doors that otherwise wouldn't. When someone tells me that they're new, I immediately sit down and think about, okay, like what are some great places for them to go network? What are some good resources I can provide them? Who can I introduce them to? People also understand because they've been there before. They know what it's like to first start networking and, so if you make that clear and also what your intentions are, whether it's learning new fields, looking for a job, building, finding friends, whatever it might be, that can help feed into it as well. So let them know. And it is okay to discuss personal interests and hobbies. I'd actually recommend it. Also, and a very important part of networking is because networking's goal is to build relationships, is to, if you're an avid cook, talk about it. If you love sports, talk about it. And if your interests are genetics and that's what you want to do for work, that's okay too. If your hobbies are building robots, go for it. But don't talk about personal problems. Don't complain about your parents or your siblings or whatever it might be. Just keep it positive.
Sorry, I'm having a little screen trouble here. Is it casting? Are you guys seeing the actual presentation of things, or is it just my end where I'm having this issue?
Oh, I thought that there was someone. Okay. Oh, so you're asked. You want us to share share screen?
Yeah, I just made you co-host. Does that help? Sorry, I had forgotten to do that.
I think so. Ralph, are you sharing? Do you want me to share?
I'm working on it. Got it. Okay.
Cool. All right.
So.
I'll have you, Ralph. I'll just tell you when to advance slides and things.
Okay. So this is the slide I was just reading from. Everyone is there for the same reasons. Don't be shy. It's as much about asking as it is about telling. If you're new, it's okay to say so. It is important to discuss personal interests and hobbies, and don't start getting into your personal problems while you're networking. Try and maintain positive conversations.
Right. So networking really fills a lot of goals. I think we have this, especially in purely professional settings, this idea of I want to find a job. I want to learn about the field I'm going to get a job in. It's also about connecting people. I do a lot of networking, not even so much for my own direct connections, but if I know somebody in one group and I know somebody in another group, and I think these two people would really do well to meet each other, I can connect those two people and kind of serve as a conduit. And, that overall helps improve your own integration into these networks. These are your responses from the little survey we sent out. So of course, finding a job, learning about fields, connecting people, joining new communities. There's a lot of kind of, different ecosystems that overlap in networking. So if you want to go and join a life science community or a subset of the life science community, and then another group that's working in life sciences, but more hardware oriented or more data oriented or more business oriented instead of science oriented, networking is a great way to make these connections and jumps from one sector to another. Next slide. It's also about making friends. Oops, go back. It can also be about making friends, getting to know colleagues. Like in this program, I know you guys can't do what has been done in the past, so like going out to the park and listening to concerts and things, but I trust the organizers of the program are doing lots of great activities like we had yesterday for all of you to get to know each other. And that's important also as you come up with a cohort of people that you've networked with, you stay in touch, you see everybody, that it's more easy to go from showing expertise. It's not a test. There's no answer. You're not going to get graded on what you're saying or how good you understand something. There's no wrong answer questions that you can ask within the constraints of proper etiquette. Be polite. Don't ask overly personal questions. Next slide. Hopefully everybody can still hear me. Of course, internet problems pop up in the middle of a presentation, but I like to think of a spectrum of different activities you can participate in. There's, I think the traditional, idea of networking that people think of when we talk about this is something like a big networking happy hour or a meetup group, a bunch of people in a space together, kind of hanging out, talking, little groups form. It can be very tricky to, insert yourself into a group like that or make connections if that's not what you're most comfortable with. But there's a whole spectrum all the way down to informational interviews, which are just one-on-one discussions with somebody that you can set up in advance. And any of these things, anything from interviews to networking happy hour, anything that expands your network, it counts as networking, and you can pick and choose off the spectrum to draw to your strengths. So, in addition to these elements, can people in the think of other activities that you might consider networking?
Did you see the slide again, Joe?
Oh, my sound is back. Yes. Asking for a one-on-one coffee chat. I see that in the chat window here. That's a good one. We're gonna hit on that also in a little bit. Other ideas around what else could count as fall on the spectrum of networking. Anybody else? One thing I like a lot is Slack groups. There's a bunch of we were just talking about this before the panel started, but Slack groups there's a bunch of them now in different sectors, and it's basically somewhere in between a Facebook group and LinkedIn. It's a little more casual than LinkedIn, but it's also a more focused community than just general social media. So I like Slack groups a lot also. We have one for GRO Biotech. The hardware community in New York City has one. There's a bunch. All right, you can go to the next slide. So it's called networking for a reason. And there are these concepts of nodes and connectors. And so some people are especially good at connecting you to wider groups of people beyond just that one-to-one connection. And so always asking for connections to other people's networks beyond just that initial person. If there's somebody that seemed to be in a whole sector that you're very interested in knowing more about and connecting to other people that they know and that they're friends with, and trying to find these people in areas where you're particularly interested in learning more about something or meeting people in that space. You find a node, somebody who is a node, you get to know them, you sort of by extension get to know their entire network. And so, everybody's got something to offer in terms of connections. You never know who the person you're talking to knows, and vice versa for you. Even as a student, you might not be a professional working in the industry for 20 years, but there are things that you're doing that you have to offer. You have the experience of this program and connections to all of the folks in the program, connections to the companies you're working with. You've got connections at your schools. There's a lot, as students, there's a lot of industry academic relations that students really, I think, help form the backbone of. And there's lots of opportunity for networking and translational work there. Next slide.
So, networking doesn't stop after the event that you attend to or attend. If all you're doing is going to the event, collecting business cards, putting them in your pocket, linking up with people on LinkedIn, you're not really networking. You're just adding connections. So in 10 months, if you want something from that person, you're not going to get it. If that person wants something, they're not going to think of you. Networks are really built on long-term relationships. So it's really important that after the first event, you follow up with the person. If it's a really important connection that you really want to get to know, it's best to follow up the same day. So like you leave the networking event, you send an email on your way home. If you're taking public transportation, if you're driving, do it when you get home, or while you're walking to your car. Alternatively, within 24 hours is ideal. Within 1 week is still okay. It's also good, find some time, right now, jump on a Zoom call, a phone call, whatever it is. When things open up a bit, go for coffee, meet for pizza, whatever it might be. Start really getting some engagement and start talking and learning about each other and building that relationship. And one other really important thing to do is identify ways to provide value. One nice thing about networking is as your network grows, it's easier as your network grows, it's easier to provide value because, for instance, if you meet someone who is really interested in working at one company and you happen to know someone who works at that company, you can be like, oh, well, you can talk to them. They can tell you about what the work culture is like, what the interview process is like, etc. But yeah, always think about ways, what does that person want or need? What are their pain points and how can you help them? Because that's a great way to develop a relationship, and if you need something from them in the future, they're going to be happy to help you.
Right. And actually, if you could go back real quick, Ralph, just to add something there, like Ralph said, it's a virtuous cycle. The more you develop relationships, the easier it gets. Two, the more relationships you can develop. But I also just want to add, don't go try to develop a relationship with somebody that you really don't want to have a concrete relationship with, just because it's a tougher thing to maintain if you're really like, I really don't want to talk to this person. I want a job here, but I really don't want to talk to this person. There are other people, sometimes you just don't click with somebody. It's like you could be acquaintances, you can see each other and say hello, but there's always more than one way to kind of build a relationship and get connected to a community that you're interested in. So it shouldn't feel like work. It shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. It should be something that you're interested in doing. Otherwise, it's going to come across. Otherwise, people are perceptive of these things.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So some of the New York City is full of networking opportunities, as I'm sure you can imagine. We threw this list together. It's not exhaustive. We actually thought of some groups that we'd like to give a shout out to that we forgot. But we're going to start off, of course, GRO Biotech, which Joe and I are part of, is great. We throw a lot of networking events. We throw events where you can learn about different fields. And we have our annual conference. We'll get into all of that in a bit. The Healthcare Club is a group of professionals in the industry within New York City. There's a email newsletter. There's a Slack group. It's active. They have job postings. It's a really great place to meet people. Health Tech Connect is similar. J Labs holds their entrepreneurs and networking mixers once a month outside of the summer months. And they also have a bunch of really interesting informational panels where you can meet people. They'll have people from across J&J and various startups come in and talk, and you always get an opportunity to talk with those people afterwards. Biolabs at NYU Langone is similar. It's just not associated with any specific company other than NYU, obviously, and Biolabs, but not an industry company. And Harlem Biospace is like a small incubator space that provides What Lab for small startups. And they also host a variety of different events that are interesting and also intimate, which is nice. Joe, you want to hit the right side?
Well, I was going to say, in the interest of time, we can jump past this slide, but I just want to point out that, these groups are all life sciences, but they're also representing various pieces of the life sciences. GRO Biotech is focused towards students and professionals who are early in their career and looking to learn more about industry. J Labs and Biolabs are focused towards startups and people who are interested in the startup ecosystem. Future of Care is clinical oriented. Health Business Leaders is business oriented. GRO Codes is, I believe, more of this tech data oriented group. And so, all these things touch the life sciences, but in different ways. So there's lots of opportunities to, one, use these groups to find out what you're interested in, and then two, once you pick the ones you like best, you to leverage them to get access to these whole networks.
Yeah, and a couple shout outs real quick, especially for the women among our group. There's a group called Women in Bio, which is fantastic. They have a lot of good events. And then also Young Women in Bio, which is also fantastic, clearly associated with Women in Bio, but for younger women. And then also there's Bio Idea, which we actually host an event that we'll touch on every year, which we unfortunately missed this year. But and then also there's Healthcare Business Women's Association, which is another event or group that you should check out.
So really hitting quickly upon our experiences in the interest of time. For me, I got my start not in the life science field, but in the hardware and kind of tech field through the Zahn Center at City College, like Rich mentioned initially. But a combination of connecting from one group to the next group to the next group, plus just changing the ecosystem I was in, going from biomedical engineering at City College to biomedical sciences at Mount Sinai. All of these groups have these connections across them, and initially it was me finding those people who were nodes and going from the Zahn Center to Next Hub Makers to New Lab to NYC. And now, since I've kind of worked my way through all of those groups, now I am a node myself. And so people who are interested in kind of jumping across or getting involved in different communities, meeting one another, that's something that, I can offer back.
Yeah, and similarly, I also actually started in the same undergraduate program, but separated in time. So we went through some of the similar nodes, but over the course of time, we've developed our own networks. And I think Joe and I are actually a great example of networking, where you develop a relationship with someone over the course of time. You find similar interests, which Joe and I share quite a few of. And then, on the left, you have a picture of us. All of these people in this picture on the left-hand side at one point knew each other, diverged, and had their networks kind of bring them back together in various ways. So, and it really has the similar network effects that they were talking about. But I remember my very first networking experience. I was an undergraduate student at City College, and it was at Google in Chelsea. And I had no idea how to network at all. And it was like really, really not a good experience. But I stuck with it, and over time, I was able. Now I'm able to just go to any event. I have a, it's not an intimidating experience anymore. It's going to start off that way most likely, but stick with it because it will get better.
Right. Being a great networker doesn't mean that you're not going to end up with awkward conversations every once in a while and moments where like, well, all right, see you later. It's getting comfortable with understanding that these things are an inevitable part of interacting with people. There's always going to be these little weird, awkward moments or things like that, but it's not something that is going to be a permanent mark upon your networking record for all time.
Yes.
So we can't talk about networking without talking about GRO Biotech, our hub for networking that we help organize. Oh, was I presenting these slides? I forgot what the order was on these. We mentioned it before, but GRO is a coalition of all the academic medical centers in the New York metro area, and our focus is on creating opportunities for students and other young professionals in the life sciences or interested in getting into the life sciences to learn more about the field, to meet people in these spaces, and really network through a bunch of different means. So we do events and happy hours in person in normal non-pandemic times. So you can jump to the next slide, Ralph. So these are some examples of we've done our an annual summer networking event over at the Alexandria Center on the river. It's beautiful. We have groups come in from industry or from organizations like Seismic, which is kind of like the LifeSci program actually but for full-time jobs, teaching people about the skills that are important if you want to get a career in the life science industry.
And then every year we have our annual conference, which is really our flagship event. When it comes to learning about new fields or finding a job, this is really a premier event that you should be attending in New York City. For instance, last year we had panels across spanning the life sciences, digital life sciences, consulting in the life sciences, investing in the life sciences, intellectual property, large industry, startups, and we brought in over 30 experienced professionals in these fields to discuss what it's like to work in these fields, how they got to them themselves, how you can get to them, how to position yourself, to really help the students in attendance understand what their options are and how to get to where they want to be. Additionally, we make sure that these people, we ask them politely, and they almost always agree because they really care about this, to come after they speak and network with the attendees. So you have the opportunity to actually meet them. And we also always include time for Q&A. So you have the opportunity to actually ask them directly questions before the networking surge starts. So if you're more comfortable in a one-on-one conversation, this would work very well for you. We also build in over 3 hours of networking throughout the conference. So you have that opportunity to make sure that you get to talk to everyone that you want to. So, yeah, I mean,
So we were going to do this as a kind of exercise where Ralph and I gave an example first and then picked on some folks to do it after us. But I think in the interest of time, we can probably just pick on some people to walk through this. What do you think, Ralph and Rich and organizers?
sounds good to me.
Alrighty, I have limited visual capacity here, so I don't know what you can see versus me, Ralph, but if we want to, if two people want to volunteer to kind of walk through this and try to have a conversation about this to learn more about one another's interests and motivations professionally. Any takers?
I guess
Any
you can,
volunteers? Any new voices? Shall we cold call?
I could do it.
who's that, Mira?
Yeah. Hi.
Hello, it's nice to meet you.
You too, Rob.
Okay, great. So, Joe, you want to pull one more person, or?
What
Anybody
does
else?
it mean? Started and someone else can volunteer in chat.
Okay, just close the chat. Okay, so how about George? You're right at
Hi,
the
Ralph.
top of the list there.
All right.
I believe we've already started our networking process anyway, right?
Yeah, I actually did send you a LinkedIn connection, I think, yesterday.
Yes.
And I already knew that you attended BME at CCNY, and I'm also an alum as of yesterday.
Oh, really? Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
awesome. Awesome. Great program over there. So there's all three of us.
Amazing. Yeah.
All right. So I guess, do you and Mira want to, I don't know how well you know each other, but do you want to give it a go?
Yeah. Hi, Mira. Nice to meet you. What is your position?
So I'll be interning as a regulatory affairs project management intern at Ovid Therapeutics in Manhattan. How about you?
I'll be interning as an R&D intern at Bon in Long Island City.
What made you apply for this job, or what about this job appeals to you?
Something that the job was attractive because the company is focused at making remote monitoring technology in the diabetes space, and I know some people with diabetes, so that's something personal that I wanted to help innovate towards. And um, in general, like I'm really interested in medical devices, so that's what brought me to that company. Um, so considering that you you found out about that position and you achieved getting it, like what are some strengths that you will bring to the table?
I really love working on a team and with people. That's one thing that drives me is getting to know people and hearing their perspective and kind of bouncing ideas off people. So a dynamic environment where there are a lot of collaborators is where I know I can thrive most. What appeals to me specifically about Ovid is that it combines kind of the startup and not so startup environments. It's more of an established startup, so to say. So I know that that'll give me a lot of opportunities to learn things for myself and to get to know new people, but also a bit of structure where I can base my work off. So
Sounds great.
what are some accomplishments you are proud of?
Um, an accomplishment that I'm proud of recently is that in the beginning of April, I joined the team in a challenge that was hosted by Columbia to make a DIY ventilator, and my team's design won funding, so I'm still on that team, and it's a very based thing, but I hope to soon like deliver the design, and I'm proud of myself and my team for stepping up to do that. What about you?
Well, for my senior capstone project, my team and I designed a prosthetic learning device for transradial amputees. Basically, the goal of our design was to help alleviate the difficulty of using a myoelectric prosthesis. It can apply a certain type of resistance to your biceps and triceps and help clarify your EMG signals so that transradial amputees have a better learning curve when trying to understand how to use their prosthetic. So we are currently in the process of getting a patent, and we're hoping to be published soon. So that's one thing that I'm proud of. What about the field interests you, or where do you see yourself after this
Um,
internship?
that's a good question. I'm interested. Like my passion is more of like the storytelling behind medical devices. Like I don't really want to be cooped up in an R&D lab and just like hacking away at a device. Um, I'm an immigrant from Venezuela, so I feel like there's my perspective. Um, from my perspective, I know that like medical care in developing countries isn't the same as it is here, and there are a lot of blockades. So um, I'm interested in being able to be a leader in innovating for developing countries and create affordable medical care.
Cool. I will jump in and end the exercise. That was great, guys. Thank you so much for doing that. I'd also like to point out that even though nobody else in this group was actively having the conversation, like I learned a bunch of stuff about both George and Mira. I'm sure Ralph did also. And so now I'm thinking about things around like your ventilator stuff. George is like, oh, okay, well, I've been working with other folks at the EDC and groups like this on COVID response. I wonder if there's some useful connection to be made there. So even as a passive observer for a large portion of the conversation, networking is happening. You're learning about these people. You're learning about all the answers to these questions. It won't always happen as direct as this, but this kind of sometimes when it's an exercise like this and there's questions, like okay, you're reading the questions back and forth, kind of like an interview. But even like we said, an informational interview and then even a regular interview for a job is a form of networking. You're getting to know people.
Yeah, and also when you are networking, a lot of the time you're walking in and there's people already talking and you're trying to get into the conversation somehow. Sometimes it involves standing there and listening. Well, a lot of the time it involves standing there and listening first because you don't want to interrupt somebody. So being able to pull things like that out, for me, for instance, like Mira, you were talking about electromyography. I have, if I heard you correctly, like I have experience in electromyography for my startup. We used that for some of the stuff that we were doing. Or George, like, you know, you brought up that you're an immigrant from Venezuela. Like that's like a perfect fit in of something personal about you that's still also relevant to what you were talking about. Wasn't you just like trying to randomly stick it in? It fit naturally, and someone can ask you about that, like, you know, how old were you when you came, whatever it might be, and that can be a way for other people to start a conversation with you, or if someone else said something like that, you could potentially start a conversation about that. Because it's not always as easy as just walking in and sticking your hand out and saying, "Hi, I'm Ralph. How you doing?" Like, you know, finding some way to bring yourself into the conversation naturally is really good.
Yeah, thanks.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's also fitting those things in, like some of the questions that we have here, fitting them into what you're saying. And then also when we were talking about what your personal interests are and things like that, finding ways to fit those into some of the stuff you're talking about. So if you have a personal interest, like for instance, what job motivates you, maybe you can also tie in your personal interests and how those um, tie into you being motivated by the job. Or what are some strengths you bring? Maybe they're not specifically job related, but they're transferable skills. You can tie in some of your own personal hobbies, for instance, and how they've helped kind of develop skills that you think will be applicable to whatever you're talking about.
And a lot of these things, you know, it shouldn't be about trying to shoehorn something into a place where it doesn't fit. A lot of these things will flow naturally,
Yeah.
just in the course of conversation. And it can be a weird balance of like, okay, I should mention this, but like I don't want to make it seem weird. It's, you know, like with all any of these things, it's like a muscle that you have to work out to get better at just understanding, you know, the flow of a conversation, context of different things. It's, you know, it's it's always going to be variable. There's, you know, we had earlier on this rule about don't talk about your personal problems, but that's not necessarily even a hard and fast rule if you really know somebody well and you've kind of just, you know, become friends with them regularly, and you just, and this is somebody that you met at a professional networking event, but now they're your friend. Like you just hang out and do other things. You know, there's a spectrum there also of familiarity that goes along kind of in another axis with the spectrum of kind of networking in terms of how many people are interacting with you at any given point in time. So it's, you know, it's all about being going into these situations so that you ultimately become more familiar with them.
Yeah. And it's not good. I think it's like Joe was saying, it's something you have to work out the muscle. And I was touching on earlier about you really want to, I'm sorry, okay.
It's just,
No, we really want to, you're going to have some awkwardly timed and awkward questions probably here and there, but over time it's going to be more natural, and you're gonna get more comfortable, and it's not going to be like you're gripping the baseball bat super tight. Uh, it's just getting out and doing it.
yep. I think we can hop over to the next slide, and while Ralph advances to the next slide, you know, I think one of the easiest ways to give yourself an advantage there is to go to networking events with people you already know, classmates or people from this program. You know, Ralph and I show up at a lot of the same networking events, and a lot of it is us kind of messaging each other beforehand. Are you going to this thing tonight? Are you going to hop on this Zoom happy hour? Things like that. So now you're like, oh, okay, Ralph is going to be there. So at least I know Ralph, and I'll probably know somebody else, and hopefully know some other person that I don't know. And all of this, you know, these connections start happening. That way you don't feel like you're totally, you know, alone and by yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and also, please feel free to contact us. George, you already hit me up on LinkedIn. I encourage everyone to do that with both of us. Always feel free to shoot us an email. And we also strongly suggest that you follow us on Twitter. Our handles GRO Biotech. Join our Slack community. You can see if you follow the link next to the Slack symbol on the bottom left. Also, highly recommended is our newsletter, bit.ly/follow-GRO. We share job opportunities. We share networking event opportunities. That's a really great thing to follow. And then also, please follow our LinkedIn page. And if you want to just learn more about the group, you can go to our website as well at bit.ly/GRO Biotech.
Does anybody have any questions or comments or stories?
I see there was a comment that people found it intimidating to do this exercise in front of a big group, and asked if we could do breakout rooms, which we don't have time for now, but we could schedule a separate event just to practice networking.
Yeah, that would be great. That was the original plan, was to do it very broken out, but based on the time constraints and kind of the number of breakout rooms we would need, we decided to not incorporate that into this. But the slides are shared. You can leverage them to do the exercises later, and I think the other thing to do is just get to know everybody in this cohort. Especially the people outside of, if there's several people from your university, get to know people from the other universities. It's a question in the chat.
So there are 2 questions. Yeah.
I'd also say, George, you did a great job. And sorry to put you on the spot like that, but you did do a great job. And if anything, that was a great first experience, because it can be intimidating when you're first starting, and especially, you're young, you might be going up to someone who's 20 years your elder and is a director at some company you really want to work at. And, it's getting those experiences under your belt that really helps.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add that one time I went to a health tech meetup in Jersey, in Morristown, and I quickly realized I was the youngest in the room by far. Most people there, one thing that I noticed especially is that most people we were all dressed up, but I had a tie on, and it was a 6 p.m. event, so most people had left work and already took their tie off, and I was definitely the only person there with the tie. So that was something like psychological that was kind of like messing with me. But then I realized like there's nothing really intimidating.
Yeah,
that ties in nicely to Tina's question in the chat around fixing a blunder around first impression, or kind of altering that. A tie is a nice, easy thing. You take that, you get there, and you're the only one wearing a tie. It's like, okay, I'll take this off, put it in my pocket. So that's an easy one. I think another framing around this is context, and not being nervous that you're the youngest person there, but being proud of that. I think if there's a lot of cases especially in the sciences, where you have this like lost generation of the time you spend in school, and it's like, oh well, I'm in school, I'm not going to go out and do anything until afterwards. And there's a reason why very often, even I am sometimes the youngest person at these events still. And so it's something, I think it's as important as the academic portion of these studies, is the interpersonal studies, and that you can only do by interacting with other people. The other part of this fixing a blunder that I would say is, unless you've done something truly egregious, which I don't think anybody in this group would do, it's, there's first impressions, but then there's longer term impressions also. And I'm of the opinion that even if you have a less than ideal first impression, it kind of gets washed away and smoothed out over time by maintaining a relationship with that person, if there's somebody that you'd like to keep in your network regularly. I'm sure half of the people that I'm regularly interacting with, I had some kind of awkward interaction with the first time I met them. It is inevitable. But ultimately, you get to a point where you're kind of like, how did we meet again? And you don't even remember.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I mean, when you're nervous and you make a blunder, I think especially early on, those kinds of blunders most people aren't focusing too much on, because when you're networking, everyone kind of gives you a grain of salt. At least I like to think so, and that's been my experience. So what Joe is talking about has a stronger effect. When you're at a networking event, you're not judging them and being like, okay, this is exactly who this person is.
How would you differentiate between networking and meeting people at a social event? And do you ever turn it off? Like, do you have a different approach, or do they kind of blend together?
I think they blend together. I think it's less an axis of what type of event it is, and more an axis of how well I know the whole group of people I'm interacting with. Like, if it's me and my friends that I've known since college started, and it's just us out somewhere, that will be a different kind of interaction than if it's some of us, but also some, like at the GRO conference last year, where after the conference ended, we went out. It was some of us, but it was some also like professional people would come with us that we had just met, and some people from the conference, other students that we had just met. That's a different kind of interaction. I think the conversation is a little different just by virtue of the level of familiarity. You kind of have to go to the least common denominator, I think, a lot of the times.
Yeah, I think there's social events, you're a little less measured in what you say. When you're at a networking event, you go back to the like etiquette. There's just certain topics you're less likely to talk about. Whether like, so for instance, politics, for instance, I never really bring politics up when I'm networking, but if I go to like a bar and politics come up, I'll chime in. I still try to avoid it, but other than that, yeah, they do blend together to a certain degree.
To hit this other question and to give an example of a networking blunder, to why I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I know I am because I met you yesterday and I forgot what the real pronunciation is. So please correct me. But finding it difficult, finding networking events, and what resources do we use during this time? So the GRO mailing list is a great place to find networking events and resources. And the story behind the GRO mailing list is that it's something I started after a very long time of being a kind of personal repository of these events and developing relationships in the New York City startup and biotech communities for the better part of 8 years. And so just by virtue of doing that for so long, you start to, these connections get built and refined. And so about these things, you're just on the right mailing lists. And so I wanted to make the barrier of entry easier for other people so that you didn't have to spend 8 years kind of meeting people to find out what the good stuff is. So I started that mailing list, and people really love it. It's been a great resource to the whole community. And now it's not just stuff that I hear about, it's things that are being sent to us.
And Joe, I actually use it. I use your mailing list. It's very helpful.
Awesome. How do you pronounce your name again? I'm sorry. That was a great example of an actual networking blunder.
It's Tewa, like say
Tewa,
what?
Yes.
Yes.
I knew there was an A kind of sound in there, and I was like, oh God.
Thank you. Is there any other, like outside of, where do you get your information from? Because I always hear about these events after the fact, like a happy hour. And I'm like, okay, that would have been nice to attend.
So a lot of them, a lot of the ones, the groups that we listed on that Biotech Networking and NYC slide have their own mailing lists. And so those mailing lists I receive and I go through them. Because some of the things aren't very relevant unless you you own a biotech company in a specific space. So there's a lot of events and webinars that like JLabs and Biolabs do that are kind of not generally applicable enough in, at least my opinion, to be shared with the entire, 2,000 plus people on our mailing list who have varied interests. So we try to kind of average it out a little bit while also recognizing that startups probably are the second largest contingent of that mailing list. But there's a bunch of things. So there's those mailing lists. There's other ones that are kind of, I guess, personal mailing lists or personal connections. That's another level of access, but that's where I think nodes come in. So it's something like, oh, how did you find out about this? And you ask me, and it's like, oh, well, I got it from this person's personal, email. And it's like, oh, can you connect me with that person? It's like, yeah, I'll introduce you over email or something like that. So there's, I think networking in and of itself creates more networking.
Yes, networking begets networking.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, I need to, it's been a fabulous discussion. I need to cut it off because we're going into the time for the next conversation. But this has been wonderful, Joe and Ralph. Thank you so much.